One of the issues that Luther famously had with the Scholastics was their use of reasoning from first principles toward knowledge of God. He emphasized that what we know of God is from revelation alone. You could use analogies pedagogically to discuss some of the things that have been revealed to us through revelation, but you can't use them to find out what God is like. In that vein, when God tells us that He's the Father, He's defining what fatherhood is. We're not looking at our earthly fathers and extrapolating upward from there to God. We're not saying this person is an authority in our life and he has power over us. Therefore, what would be the greatest authority or the greatest power? And let's extrapolate and call that God. Rather, God has told us that He's a father, and He tells us what that means. And then from that, the derived analogy is the human father, who is representing and looking like God in some ways. And then we can use the analogy pedagogically to look at some of the familial relationships that might derive from that. Likewise with marriage. We don't look at human marriages between a man and a woman and then say, well, that might be something like what Christ does with His bride. Rather, Christ tells us that the church is His bride. He shows us what that is. He builds and purifies His church out of human believers. We are individually not the bride. We are members of the bride, members of the body. And He marries that body, bringing that human community of the church, indwelt by the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and enlivened by the Holy Spirit, into relationship with the Godhead. Jesus, as the groom, marries the bride, the church. And we, the church, become part of that cosmic family through our adoption as sons, but also marriage as brides to Christ. From this, then, we can see the derived analogy of the husband and wife and the human marriage, and see what it aspires to, and how it would look like the Christ marriage to the bride. Just as God reveals Himself as the Father, and Christ the groom to the bride, the church, we also see that Jesus is the Lamb slain before creation. He is the ultimate and perfect sacrifice. This means that we didn't develop the idea of Jesus as a sacrifice from pagan rituals or ancient ideas of sacrifices. We didn't first develop through rudimentary means a grain sacrifice and then an animal sacrifice, or God forbid, a human sacrifice. We can't then build up our idea and extrapolate from that to the idea of an ultimate sacrifice of appeasing the ultimate God with His own Son and find that that propitiates His anger. Rather, what has happened is God has given us the sacrifices through the Old Testament as examples and shadows of the ultimate sacrifice which was instituted before creation. Jesus is the Lamb slain before creation. The whole plan was written into history before man was even created. Jesus is the only begotten Son of the Father, and the Son becomes a human being and sacrifices Himself willingly, representing humankind as an atonement and a propitiation. This ultimate sacrifice is cosmic. It was written into the fabric of history from the beginning. It is the way that God brings reconciliation between Him and humanity, bringing us into the family of God as the bride of Christ, to rule cosmically with God as part of His family.